Looking to buy, sell, or grow your business to position it for a sale? As the owner and managing partner of Sun Acquisitions, Domenic Rinaldi has personally been involved in over 300 M&A transactions. He has seen and done it all, consulting with large and small businesses across a broad range of industries. On M&A Unplugged, he'll interview buyers, sellers, and their advisors about their experiences scaling, selling, and acquiring businesses. On every episode, you will get key learnings, but most importantly, you will be better prepared for your own acquisition or sale. This is M&A Unplugged with your host, Domenic Rinaldi.
In today's digital world, cyber attacks can happen anywhere, resulting in increased data breaches. This has become a significant issue for business owners and leaders. And maybe not so surprisingly, this has become a hot button issue for business acquirers. Companies want to know that they are acquiring a firm that has taken the necessary precautions to protect the company's data assets. Our guest today, Craig Sherwood, is a partner at Shambliss Security, and they specialize in the entire spectrum of concerns related to cybersecurity. Their team has the experience to assess and implement the proper strategies to close the gap between your current risks and cybersecurity peace of mind. Craig, welcome to M&A Unplugged.
Thank you for having me today, Domenic.
Yeah, so look, right off the bat, I'm a little over my skis here. Cybersecurity, I haven't done a ton with, but I'm so excited to learn about it because it's such a big issue. If we could start with maybe provide the M&A Unplugged community a background on yourself and an overview of Shambliss.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Domenic. I think a little background about myself. I've been in professional service and IT consulting for the past 25 years, born and raised in Chicagoland. And, ideally, the way that our organization goes to market is very, very simplistic. Shambliss Security is a provider of cybersecurity solutions, and we offer a complete portfolio of strategic services to help our clients not only define their security programs, but also identify their risks and deploy the right technologies so that they can be operationally effective. More importantly, for our audience today, respond to the threats and breaches or potential breaches that are out there today. I think the best way to explain how we go to market and what we do most succinctly is the idea that we differentiate ourselves by our competitors by being objective, unbiased, and ideally experienced security solutions that need to not only accelerate their growth, but more importantly, drive operational efficiency so they can reduce their risk when they're looking to purchase an acquisition.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity and the definition of it. And I'm sure it's growing and the definition is getting wider, right? I mean, the threats are coming from all sorts of angles, but let's talk about the breadth and depth of things that you deal with to identify for companies.
Ideally, when we work with organizations that are looking to acquire or divest an organization, I think it really starts with a couple different things. And number one, the most prevalent thing we need to look at is where is their data? And when we say data, what is and where is it stored? And what is the data? Is the data sensitive material, like example, social security numbers and dates of birth? Or is the data intellectual property, like for a manufacturer, where if that data falls into a competitor's hands, they could lose a competitive advantage?
Makes sense. And so what types of companies do you typically work with? What's your target market?
Our target market today is middle market. And for our definition of middle market, it's anything under $250 million in revenue a year.
Under $250 million. And when we first started talking, when we met a couple of weeks ago, you had mentioned that you do a lot of this work in mergers and acquisitions. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think one of the things we always like to identify when we talk to a private equity organization or a venture capital organization is really to uncover what they're doing today. And in today's marketplace, having an advantage, having a opportunity to negotiate that is unlike any other is in the cybersecurity space. And to give you an example that's out there today very easily, when Marriott Corporation merged with Starwood about a year and a half ago, everyone had done due diligence, and supposedly they had really done cybersecurity due diligence. Well, after the fact, after the transaction happened, they found out there was a major breach that was happened between Starwood and Marriott, and there was a post-acquisition alteration of the deal because due diligence from a security perspective wasn't done. And when we work with venture capital organizations and private equity organizations, that's one of the greatest attributes that we can say is we point to something like this. And if you can save the acquirer money and increase the value, that's what we're there to help them to do.
Understood. So are you typically coming into an M&A deal to do the cyber assessment? Is the buyer bringing you in, or do you sometimes work on the seller's behalf? How does that typically work?
It's typically a 60-40 split where we're brought in 60% by the buyer side. And, one of the reasons, one of the benefits, there are a couple of real big benefits on the buyer side. Number one is to protect the brand. Very, very important. You want to make sure that nothing goes haywire and nothing happens to the deal because there's something happening as far as a target acquisition. I think the other major benefit when we work on the buy side is the idea that, you can demonstrate to your stakeholders and the regulators that every rock has been turned over to make sure there are no issues that are going to happen post-acquisition. On the flip side, the greatest example I can give you is if you're a seller and you're looking to, divest your organization, one of the things we always give an example of is you're looking to sell your house. Okay, if you're going to go out and sell your house, are you going to sell your house with a bunch of holes in your walls? Of course you're not. So by doing that and propping up and fixing maybe what you have in-house, it maximizes your value as the seller to protect against a devaluation from the buyers.
Yeah. I imagine something like that really gives buyers peace of mind that the business that's being transferred is a clean asset, and that always improves value for an owner, right?
Yeah, and again, you don't want to have the example I always give somebody. You don't want to have a dirty environment. For us, you don't want to have something that's going on in the background while you're trying to close a deal. Most merger and acquisitions like to close in 30 to 45 days. If we come in and do our assessment for an organization, we're in and out within 10 to 14 days. So we're definitely within that time barrier to close a deal. And if there's something that we report to a buyer and we say, listen, this has to be sewn up, you have major exposure, that's something they need to consider when they do their transaction.
Yeah. So I want to get to what specifically you do when a company calls you in. But before we do that, maybe you could help me and the M&A Unplugged community, put our hands around, how big of an issue is this? Are there statistics and is there data out there about how many occurrences are occurring? What's this costing the economy and those sorts of things?
There's lots and lots of data by very, very large organizations. And the greatest single attribute that I can attest to today is the fact that the cost of not doing anything affects the M&A transaction very, very heavily. A good example of that would be, if you are acquiring a company and you are looking at a quality of earnings report and it says X and the seller has a quality of earnings that says Y, there's a balance. And what we find today in the transactions is sophisticated buyers in the private equity area are coming to the table and saying, we've done a cybersecurity assessment, an enterprise security assessment, and we feel that the carve out to mitigate the risk is X amount of dollars. And as a seller, when you come to the bargaining table and don't have anything to counter that, that's a disadvantage. And that's something, that is really, really important to understand is you have to have all your tools in the wheelhouse available to act upon. And what we're finding is one side or the other in the negotiating table has it and the other doesn't. And as I think deals become more complicated, I think as money frees up, there are going to be more attributes and more check boxes in that due diligence. And one of them is going to be doing a security assessment prior to a deal.
Yeah, that's great information. It makes total sense. I had read a statistic somewhere recently that said the U.S. companies in the U.S. were number one in the world as far as being susceptible to cyber attacks. Is that an accurate statement?
Very much an accurate statement. And as far as the attacks themselves, It's a wide range of attacks. If you are in the example online retail business like an Amazon, and again, that's a very large example, but if you're not protecting your digital assets from third-party threat actors, you can be, in this example, when you do online retail, shut down by the banks because you are not in a regulatory compliance issue called PCI. If you are not PCI compliant as a online retailer, your banks can say, we don't want to do business with you as an entity, and you're out of business. That's a great example. Another example, which everybody hears about, is ransomware attacks. What are ransomware attacks? Those are threat actors who basically come in and shut down your organization, and until you pay them, they're not going to give you the keys to the kingdom to turn your company back on. That's a huge issue that's happening today. More and more organizations are buying cyber liability coverage to mitigate those costs. However, you still, as an organization, have to protect yourself on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. And I could get how, an Amazon and companies like that are probably under attack all the time, right? In the major credit card platforms. But if I own a 15, $20 million manufacturing business or healthcare related business, do I really need to worry about this, at the same level that these large multinational companies are worried?
I would say yes, in my professional opinion, and the reason being is because large enterprise global organizations have a fiduciary to report this. Small, middle market businesses where we focus do not have public interest in mind. They're not answering to a board of directors or shareholders. Typically, small and middle market organizations are privately held. And ideally, one of the things that we always, try and explain to our customers is the idea that, the remediation costs to fix your problem once it happens is significantly greater than trying to do it ahead of time. Fixing it after the fact, very costly, very, very costly.
Yeah, ounce of prevention, pound of pain.
Correct. I mean, to give you some simple statistics, the average time to identify a breach of any sort is roughly about 200 days.
Oh my God.
That's a huge amount of time from start to finish. And this year alone, in I'll call it 2019, the average cost of a breach was roughly $8 million for a middle market organization. The average cost for a small business, and in my opinion, a small business is like, let's pick a number, under $10 million, roughly about $375,000. A small, medium business that does $10 million, can they absorb a $350,000 or $400,000 loss? I would be challenged to say they could recuperate that.
Wow, so almost over a half a year to even know that you've been breached. So people have breached your systems. They're poking around, and the average time is they're poking around for over a half a year.
Yeah.
Wow.
A great example. I mean, a great example is, if you're an executive in an organization and you do online transfers, ACHs, or potentially wire transfers, and someone is in your system just waiting, and they see an email and they look to see how you and your financial controller or CFO work. And if you know that every Friday you release wire transfers, you can potentially, if you're in there, mitigate and get in there and say, hey, we're going to make this name change and add a number 1 or add a question mark. And because they've mimicked your responses as an executive, they now have potentially the ability to make financial decisions and take money that should be going out as regular operating business costs and send them to something that is in an overseas bank. And as the fiduciary responsibility is owned by a CFO, they have to be able to have checks and balances. And if those checks and balances and policies and procedures are not in place, it gives the third-party threat actor the ability to manipulate and take advantage of their mistakes.
Wow. Is there any type of insurance that would cover a small business? I mean, I would argue that, a business under $10 million that gets hit with a $400,000, almost $400,000 cyber cost, that's going to be painful. Does insurance cover that?
Yes, with a great caveat saying that not all insurance carriers cover the same things the same way. And a great example that I would give you as well would be something along the lines where we have a customer currently that had a ransomware attack. They did not have the right cyber liability coverage. They thought their tech errors and emissions coverage would cover this breach. It did not, because there are specific exclusions that are in cyber liability coverages and regular errors and emissions coverages, and they don't necessarily intersect. They run parallel. And what I would advise anybody from the podcast today is to have a sit down with your broker, with your insurance agent, to really go over the core areas of cyber liability coverages prior to renewal, so to make sure you have the right coverages for your business.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice. All right, well, let's move over to Shambliss and let's talk a bit about your approach. So somebody's called you in and has said, look, the company hasn't gone through an assessment. What are the steps and what's involved in what you do? And I think I know that you guys also will implement the necessary changes as well, correct?
Yeah, we take a multi-step approach. Our organization really comes in and really focuses on, I think, on the beginning to really set a foundation. The way Shambliss sets a foundation with any organization is we come in and ask business level questions and work our way down. And what I mean by that is we will work with a CEO, a CFO, a director to find out really what their business does and be an advisor to their business and do what we would call a functional assessment. Based on that functional assessment, we will then understand where their business is and where they want to go. And then what we do is we come in and we do what we would call an enterprise security assessment, which is basically a technical term for doing checks and balances on their current state. And once we do that, what we like to do in our enterprise security assessment is we give clients 3 documents. Number 1, we give them an executive summary and we give them dashboards. It's really easy to understand as a business owner at the middle market to say, okay, strategically, these are where I can go and this is where I need to be. The second item that we always give them is what we call a security maturity model rating. And we pick certain domains where we rate the client as far as what they have, 1 to 5, 1 being very poor, 5 being great and perfect. I would say to you that most organizations that don't have any security typically rate towards the bottom half. People that are in the middle have an idea what they're doing, and the people that are very sophisticated are typically on the higher side. But again, that maturity scorecard gives leadership in organizations the ability to understand where they are and where they want to go to. And then the last part of our assessment, which I think is the most important part, is giving an organization a roadmap that they can utilize to be able to be manageable and scalable to move forward in their security posture. Because ultimately, if their maturity model overall is a 1 and they want to go to a 3, by giving an organization a roadmap, we can help them identify and get them to the next level.
So let's go back to that first step where you're doing the assessment. So what exactly is your team doing in that step? I envision, let me just tell you what I envision as I hear you talk about that. I envision a team of really, techie guys sitting in a room and just trying to pound on somebody, that company's servers and all their data assets and trying to breach and break through every wall they can. Is that essentially what happens?
In the assessment phase, no, that's actually not what happens. Really, in the assessment phase, what we do, which again is a little different than most organizations, is we're not there to physically break down their systems. What we are there to do is look at it from a business perspective. And we really want to understand what critical issues are important to them, number 1. And one of the biggest things that we talk to them about across any organization is having a clear understanding of where their data is. We can talk about technology, we can talk about security and privacy, but ultimately there's 5 questions, there's 5 things that we ask somebody in the assessment. Number 1, what is their sensitive data? Number 2, where is their sensitive data being stored? Number 3, and I think this is the most important in my opinion, what security threats do they think they're exposed to? Number 4, what is their current security posture? And most importantly, as I said before, is how do they protect themselves now and in the future? And by having an assessment on the business level, we uncover these things and we really try and provide to them a basis for business going forward versus technology.
Got it. Got it. And so once you do this assessment, then is it then you're delivering back to them some solutions that they might want to implement in an implementation phase? Are you testing some of their holes in their technology?
Yeah, when we do our assessment, it's a multi-prong approach. The assessment is a fixed timeline, fixed fee procedure. Once we give the customer the three documents, the dashboard with executive summary, the risk modeling, and the remediation roadmap, we sit with them and say, here's where we feel you need to be as far as the remediation roadmap, and here are your greatest risks: red, yellow, green. We then say to them, here's what you should do. What would you like us to do? And then phase two is mitigation, where we put together a project or a project plan to get them from point A to point B. Lastly, once we would actually mitigate the issues that they would have that was uncovered from the assessment, we can help them manage and monitor it long term.
And what does mitigation look like? And I imagine it looks like all sorts of things, Craig, but what is it? Is it a combination of hardware, software, third-party solutions? Like what does that look like?
Great question. I would say to you, it can be all over the board, but I'll pick one area just for our audience today. When we go in and we do an assessment, I would say if an organization has never thought about security seriously in the past, one of the biggest issues that we are confronted with is they don't understand that they need to have policies and procedures in place. So if and when something happens, they know how to react. And what is uncovered in an assessment is basically stated, well, we have a business continuity plan, but we do not have an incident response plan. And an incident response plan, or IR plan, is actually identifying when something is broken into, how you as an organization react. And most companies that we work with that have never had this before are like, yes, we need to have this. This will get us where, you don't feel like, oh, the sky is falling. What do we do? They feel prepared.
Yeah, that's got to give them some comfort. What do companies who have lots of employees out there do? Employees, human nature, right? They're going to travel to sites that, aren't safe and potentially put the company at risk, right? And so, how do you protect yourself against those individual users and make sure that, their computers are not getting breached, that it reaches back to you? And what if they use multiple computers? So you've issued them maybe a company laptop, but they also have a desktop at home, or they have an iPad, and they're maybe getting into your systems from multiple devices. How do you accommodate for something like that?
The best accommodation that I'll identify maybe in a two-prong approach is education, number one, backed up by a strong policy and procedure by your organization. Great example. Let's just say you are an outside sales working for a multinational and you go to Starbucks. Most people log into the free Wi-Fi at Starbucks. And ideally, you should not be using a third-party login if you are working on your computer for a company. And therefore, if your organization has a policy and procedure in place and it states the only way you log in from outside the network is via a virtual private network, a VPN, or you don't have access, that's mitigated. The other way, which again is very, very simplistic, and again, to me, it's very much common sense, is you need to educate your organization and create a culture that is based on security. That takes time. And as your organization grows, that is something that you can do by doing online training, You can do that by tabletop exercises, which are exercises that reinforce online training. And if you have a solid policy and procedure in place, that gives you and the rest of your organization as leaders the ability to say, we're doing the best that we can, and that's positive.
Right, right. So, do you have an example of where somebody, a company owner knew they were going to march down the path of selling their business, and they brought your company in, and you were able to move the needle in a meaningful way for them? Do you have an example like that?
Absolutely. From the sell side, I think the greatest example that I can give you is we worked with a corporation that was based on the West Coast. On the sell side, we were brought in by an independent broker to help shore up the deal. And one of the things that we began speaking to the executive leadership was talking about how they specifically needed to have a security foundation as far as a framework. And when we talk about a security framework, these are standards that larger companies look to when they're buying companies. The greatest example that I can give to you and the rest of the audience today is ISO. ISO 27001 is a security framework that organizations need to comply with. And if they do that, it gives them the ability to be more attractive to buyers. So what we did, we were brought in to get them to be ISO 27001 certified. We came in and did an assessment. We found out they were nowhere near being able to get certification for ISO 27001. We gave them a roadmap to get there over a 4-month period. They actually engaged us after the assessment to help them get from point A to point B. And when they were able to then strike the deal about 4.5, 5 months later, the buyers actually came to us and said one of the reasons why they went through with the deal was because the leadership of the seller was so committed to shoring up and getting the ISO certification.
Yeah, stamp of approval. So after you had implemented and gotten them certified, who then manages that on an ongoing basis? Is it somebody internally? And if you don't have the resource internally, is that something that your firm would do, or is there another third party that they would look to bring on?
Depending on how the organization is set up, and in this example, when the acquiring company bought this organization, they actually had a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, on hand. However, they did engage us, and we do offer this service where we have a virtual CISO, and these kinds of services are ad hoc. So if your organization is a lean organization and can't afford, nor do they want to have a specific headcount for a security leader, this is an opportunity for us to come in ad hoc and help an organization piecemeal do what they need to do to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, it's great.
So it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So who typically brings you into a deal? Or is it an attorney that's bringing you in, an accountant? How do you typically get introduced into a deal?
Typically, we get brought in one of two ways, either by a large financial organization, a private equity organization, or a venture capital firm, or by the attorneys. We work with a great number of middle market attorneys across the country, and typically we are brought in side by side at the point of they want to put a letter of intent together, and then we get brought in next to them. We don't work under the attorney-client privilege. We work right next to them, so for confidentiality reasons.
Yeah, yeah. As a matter of fact, we had an attorney on not too long ago, Jeff Cockrell from McGuire Woods, and he is the practice leader for the private equity part of that practice. That's somebody, I don't know if you know those folks, but if you don't, that's somebody you definitely should get introduced to, and I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, no, love to the opportunity. I mean, I would say the greatest asset that we can be to any private equity organization, venture capital, or law firm is knowledge. Let us help you help your clientele. We are the subject matter experts that can help define and help you mitigate the bumps in the road of a deal and be able to help negotiate, positive or negative, the reality of the technology. That's what we do really, really well.
Yeah, and sadly, I think that this is an issue that's not going away. It's only probably going to escalate, and something that I think more and more people are going to start hearing about and doing. And so, while I think maybe it might not seem to some of the smaller clients that are listening to the podcast, I think you really have to be aware that this is a threat out there, and it could cause some significant monetary damages and reputation damages as well, right? Which go way beyond what the monetary damages are.
Yeah, I mean, the brand reputation is significant. No one wants to have a political or marketing nightmare that happens when you hear a large organization had a breach or had an incident. To modify this to the middle market, the best example that I can give is really protecting your assets against the ability to do business with your clients and your new potential clients. And if new potential clients hear or are aware that you had a data leakage issue or a cyber incident, they could be not wanting to work with you because they don't know what's at risk. And contractually, in our industry, we see a lot of companies going to where they have master service agreements and they have flow downs saying, you will protect our data and your data, or we will not do business with you. So, from a business development standpoint, it enables companies that have gone through an assessment, that have had penetration tests, who have great policies and procedures in place, to use that as a positive marketing tool to get new business because their competition's not doing that today.
You better believe it. Absolutely. Craig, this has been great information. I learned a ton. Is there anything that we didn't hit on that would be important for the M&A Unplugged community to know?
You know, I think the one thing that I would leave with you and the rest of the M&A community that listens to the podcast would be knowledge. And if we can really understand what is the business driver for any deal, I think the idea here is we want to protect and uncover flaws that are normally hidden so that the deal goes through and it doesn't cost the acquirer or the seller dollars. At the end of the day, it's all about dollars and cents, and that's what we want to do. We would love to get a true cost of the deal and protect against vulnerabilities that you might not be aware of.
Yeah, that's great advice. Craig, if folks wanted to get in touch with you to learn more, how could they reach you?
Sure. They can reach me at craig.sherwood at shambliss-security.com. And I can also be reached by phone, area code 847-323-4001.
And Shambliss is S-H.
A-M,
right?
Shambliss, SHAMBLISS hyphen security.com.
Great. Craig, thanks so much. Really pleasure having you here.
Domenic, it's been all my pleasure. Thank you for having me today.
So, M&A Unplugged community, let me just recap a few things that came up during our conversation here with Craig. Number one, U.S. companies are the number one target in the world for cyber attacks. So, people are trying to pierce our networks, get to our data, and we need to be diligent about protecting that. The average cyber attack, as you heard Craig talk about, was somewhere between 400,000 and several $1 million for lower middle market companies. So those are not small numbers. And what really blew my mind is it takes about 200 days to even identify that you've had an attack. So think about all the things that somebody could be gathering from your data that you don't even know is happening. And we also talked about insurance. Go back and check your policies. Make sure that your insurance policy covers cyber attacks. And if not, have your insurance agent amend that. Make sure you've got the right coverage. And the last thing, probably, in my view, the most important to the longevity of the business is the brand reputation hit that you could take if you do suffer a cyber attack and your client's data or other data is taken and used in some other ways. All of today's information will be available in the show notes. If you would like to learn more about the process of acquiring or selling a business, please visit our website at sunacquisitions.com, or feel free to reach out to me at drinaldi@sunacquisitions.com. I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the M&A Unplugged podcast. And until then, please remember that scaling, acquiring, or selling a business takes time, preparation, and the proper knowledge.
Thank you for joining us today on M&A Unplugged. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and recommend it wherever you get your podcasts. If you want more great information on how to scale, acquire, or sell a business, please visit our website at sunacquisitions.com.